what we've been going through is from Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus taught about what does it look like when we fully surrender to our higher power. And he talked about the 8 signs known as the Beatitudes or attitudes. 8 attitudes, 8 signs that we are fully surrendered to our higher power. And then after he taught that, he goes into areas of our life that demonstrate a change when we do surrender to our higher power. He's talked about resentments. We looked at that 2 weeks ago. He talked about lust. We looked at that last week. Today, he talks about integrity. And so that's going to be the thesis of our time together is, what is integrity? What does that look like when we surrender to our higher power? In order to understand his teaching on integrity, we've got to lay out a context on just the understanding of the incredible power of our choice of words, that our words matter, and they make a significant impact on ourselves and on others. One of the verses that talks about this is found in Proverbs chapter 12, where it says, "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." And what that is talking about is the tremendous potential and power for our word choice. That words can be yielded like a weapon, and our words have the ability to go beneath skin and bone, and they can do incredible damage like a weapon. They can even kill. They can kill our relationship. They can kill our reputation. They can kill our legacy. They can kill and damage other people. In fact, those of you who are familiar with the Manwala model, you know that there are 47 different abusive behaviors that he details in that model. And what's really insightful is over 80% of those behaviors involve our words in one way or another. So the vast majority of the abuses that we inflict upon our partners have to do with our words. Our words have power, and they have power to impact our partners in our relationship. But our words also have power over us. We are impacted by our words. Some of our words are never spoken out loud, but they are internal. We call it self-talk. And so some of the things that we may be sharing, not with others, but with ourselves, is affecting our mindset. It's affecting our beliefs. It's affecting our self-perception. And in a very real way, when we engage in lying with our words to other people, the first lie we told was to ourselves. We deceived ourselves before we deceived anyone else. And we get to the point where we begin to believe our own lies. That's the power of words. But I also want you to notice in this verse that not only do our words have the potential to bring death and destruction and harm, but our words also have the potential to heal. It says when we are wise with our words, when we carefully choose our words. So that brings a lot of hope, that the same instrument that we used to bring death and destruction to our partner and to our relationship can now be used as an instrument of healing. And one thing that all of us men in recovery who are in a relationship have in common is we genuinely want our partners to heal from the damage that we've inflicted. One of the main ways that they can experience that healing is through our words. However, if our words are not followed by action, they become empty words. And in fact, they become another source of injury for our partner. There's not a human alive who doesn't need to hear words like, "I love you. I value you. I care about you. I choose you. I cherish you." In fact, there's another Proverbs that says that both life and death are in the power of the tongue. That such a small part of our physicality has such a huge impact on our life. We can bring life with our words. We can bring destruction with our words. In fact, in a very real way, there is a form of torture called solitary confinement. And it's not physical torture. It's emotional torture. It's psychological torture. And the reason it's so effective is because the need to exchange words with other people is so fundamental to being human that to be denied that exchange can actually lead to madness. Even the most pathological people in our culture are negatively impacted when they are put in isolation and they're not allowed to use words or receive words. Our words are a part of what it means to be human, and our words matter. Now, if you are to take everything that the Bible has to say about words, you can boil it down to two fundamental principles. It's the principle of love and the principle of truth. We are told in Scripture to speak the truth, but to speak the truth in love. These two must always go together, or you don't have either. Truth without love isn't really truth. It's coldness. Love without truth isn't really love. It's cowardice. Sometimes we deceive ourselves, and we actually believe that by withholding truth from our partners, we're protecting them. But if we were rigorously honest with ourselves and we cut through the self-deception, we're really not protecting them. We're protecting ourselves. These two must go together, or you don't have either one at all. Love only exists when there's truth-telling. Truth-telling is only honorable when it is spoken in love. These two must be coupled together in order for us to follow the path of integrity. So with that as a context, I want to now look at what did Jesus teach next in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. This is what he said about integrity. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Instead, let your yes be yes, and your no be no. What he's sharing in this text is two things about integrity. He's sharing the principle of integrity and the practice of integrity. First, let's look at the principle. In order to understand the principle, we have to understand what is the context in first century Palestine when Jesus taught this. What did they understand, the original listeners, when they were listening to this principle? And in order to understand the context, we need to understand that this was the culture of the day. When they would swear an oath, or when they really wanted to be trusted as telling the truth, then they would tend to swear either on God's name or they would swear on the temple if they really wanted the listener to believe that they were telling the truth. Then they would swear on the temple because that's where it was believed that God would dwell. And so the closer they would swear to God's presence or God's name, the more seriously it was taken. Also, the more serious the lie was if they swore on God's name or they swore on the temple and they weren't telling the truth. This was a common practice that Jesus said, you need to stop doing this. Quit swearing on heaven or swearing on a stack of Bibles or swearing on earth or swearing on your dead grandma or swearing on the life of your kids or swearing to God and all of this swearing so that you can be taken seriously. Instead, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And what he was saying was, you don't need to swear on the temple. You don't need to swear on heaven. You don't need to swear to God. You don't need to swear on these various locations or degrees of seriousness. Because what we need to understand is our higher power is with us. He is with us right now. And when we are mindful that God's presence is with us right now, wherever we go, that brings a level of accountability into our life. So the principle is this: no matter where I go, no matter what I'm doing, my higher power is with me. And because he is with me, I want to have integrity. I want my words to be true. because I am mindful of his presence with me. Now, let me tell you a very practical way that I live this out. And some of you have heard me share this before. I have a mantra in my coupleship with Jacqueline that helps me to practice God's presence and her presence. I call it WWJD. And that has a double meaning for me. My higher power is Jesus. And so WWJD reminds me, what would Jesus do? But it also reminds me, what would Jacqueline do? I try to practice both of their presence, no matter where I go, no matter what I'm doing. And it brings a level of accountability where I am the same person, no matter where I go or what I do. Because I want to act in such a way that how would they think about what I'm doing or what I'm saying or what I'm seeing? How would they feel about this? How would this impact them? And so it brings this level of consistency and accountability when I am ever mindful that the two of them are beside me. That's the principle that Jesus is describing here. It's illustrated in Psalm 16, where David says, I have set God ever before me. Because he is at my right hand, that's the visualization, I will never be shaken. This is the essence of a conscious contact with our higher power. It's being ever mindful that he is always with us. Another spiritual discipline that describes this is practicing the presence of God. It's not that God wasn't near David until David set him there. That's not what this verse means. What this verse means is David reminded himself to be mindful that God's present, that he would visualize that he is at my right hand at all times. David goes on to say later in another verse that no matter where I go, there you are. If I go to the highest mountain, God, you are there. If I go to the lowest valley, you are there. If I go even to the depths of the ocean, you are there. There is nowhere I can go where I can escape your presence. You are always with me. That is conscious contact with our higher power. And that brings a level of accountability and integrity to our lives and what we do. Let me give you a very practical illustration from my own life from this week. Many of you know that Jacqueline and I have a side business that we do where we do dog sitting, and it's on a service, an app called Rover. And one of the boundaries that we have is if there is going to be a client that is dropping off a dog or picking up a dog, and it's a female, and that female is either tempting for me or triggering for Jacqueline, then we are very careful to make sure that Jacqueline takes care of the drop off and Jacqueline takes care of the pickup so that I don't have any interaction with this person. So it's just a boundary that we do so that we can safely conduct our business. I had a request earlier this week that came through the app, and it had a small little thumbnail, a profile picture that was too small for me to tell what the person looked like, but I could tell that it was a female. Some of the time in the past, what I've done is to click on that profile picture to see, is safe? Can I take care of the drop-off, or does Jacqueline need to take care of this? Would I be tempted by this person? Would Jacqueline be triggered by this person? But I felt this nudge this past week when I saw that request come in. And there's that thumbnail. And I'm wanting to protect myself and protect my partner. But I felt this nudge that I concluded was probably my higher power, where I asked myself, Roy, is it totally necessary to look at this profile picture? And is it the safest route? Is it the safest option? How would Jacqueline feel if she was with you right now and you clicked on that thumbnail? Yes, your heart is in the right place. Yes, you're wanting to protect both of you and your coupleship, but is it necessary? Is it the safest choice? And how would Jacqueline feel if she was next to you right now? And Jacqueline was out of town. She's on a flight right now coming back home. And so I chose not to click on that thumbnail. I chose not to zoom in on that picture. Instead, I reached out to Jacqueline and said, listen, we've had a request. I can tell it's a female. I want you to look at the profile picture and you decide whether this person is safe or not. Jacqueline looked at the profile picture and said, no, this person is not safe at all. I need to handle the drop off for this client. That is a very practical way of practicing the presence of Jesus on my right side and Jacqueline on my left side. That I've got this JJ sandwich going on where I try to be ever mindful that they're both with me, that God is always with me, and I don't need to bring him into my presence, but I act as if Jacqueline is always with me. And that brings a level of consistency to what I say and to what I do. There's two impacts when we are mindful of God's presence with us, like this verse talks about. The first one is I don't want to do anything to disappoint him because he's with me. But secondly, there's another positive impact. This verse says, because he's at my right hand, I will never be shaken. That is talking about fear. That's talking about what we would call today dysregulation. David is saying, because I practice God's presence, I have more boldness, I have more courage, I am more centered, I am more grounded, I'm not so afraid, I'm not so dysregulated, because the one who loves me the most in this world is always next to me. He will never abandon me, he will never forsake me. One of the things I've observed in recovery, just anecdotally from other brothers in recovery, is this dynamic. Those that are in recovery that are able to come to the place where they conceive of their higher power as being personal, as being a benevolent friend who is always there, who is listening, who has more power than we do, especially over our addiction, and is always willing to help. That he is personally involved in their life, like a father or a loving friend. When we're able to have that kind of mindfulness, I see those men tend to do better when it comes to the 12 steps and to their recovery work. Now, we respect all perspectives of higher power, but that's just been something that I've noticed. What we're talking about is what I believe to be Jesus teaching the secret of integrity, that when we practice God's presence, this will make us the same person everywhere we go. You're the same person in public, you're the same person in private. What I did during my acting out days is I was behaving like a functional atheist. I was not mindful of God being with me while I acted out. And if I had been mindful of that, I never would have made the choices that I made. But I did not practice his presence. I did not have a conscious contact with him. Therefore, I made decisions that were duplicitous. I was one person in public, one person in private. That's the principle of integrity. Jesus also talks about the practice of integrity. He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Those of you who come from a math background, you're probably familiar with the word integer. Integer simply refers to a whole number. It's not a fraction. It's not fractured. It's whole. Integer is the root word where we get the word integrity. A person with integrity is a person who is whole. A person without integrity is a person who is fractured. They only share a fraction of who they are. They're fractured in the way that they are one way in this environment, but a different way in this environment. What Jesus is teaching here is that there should be no levels of truth. We should have the same level of truth no matter where we are or what we're doing. Have you ever caught yourself or heard someone else say something like, to be honest, yada, 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 or honestly, yada, yada, yada? When we practice that, what we are implying is everything we said prior to that statement may not have necessarily been the truth, but now we have a deeper level of truth with what we're about to share. And it's really no different than 2,000 years ago when they were swearing on this and swearing on that. And Jesus is saying, don't have levels of honesty. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. Let your word be impeccable. Let what you say be so true that anyone who hears it can count on it. They can bank on it. That it is solid. That there's not levels of truth where we have to use certain prefixes like honestly and to tell you the truth, or I'm going to shoot straight with you. And now that seems to elevate a level of truth that we don't normally practice. The theologian Lewis Smedes has this quote that I thought was appropriate today. He says, "Since we got married, my wife has lived with 5 men, and they were all me." He's talking about the way we tend to live fractured lives. I like to say that I am Roy 2.0. I am not the same person. As I've gone through the steps and as I've had a spiritual awakening with my higher power, and he has transformed me down to what feels like my very DNA. And I don't recognize the person I am today. I am a new version of myself. But there shouldn't be 3.0 and 4.0 and 5.0 and all these versions of who I am and all these levels of honesty. My wife shouldn't wake up tomorrow and wonder which Roy is going to show up today. That's not an integer. That's not whole. That's fractured. That's a fraction. And what Jesus is talking about is, if you want to live a life of integrity, practice the presence of your higher power. Let your yes be yes. Let your no. Be the same person everywhere you go, everything you do, and everything you say, because God is always at your right hand. So let me leave you with just a couple of reflective questions as we close the devotional. Just ask yourself some of these integrity questions. Number one, do you say one thing, but you end up doing another? Do you say you will do something, but then you don't follow through? Imagine how that hurts your credibility. Your yes is not yes, and your no is not no. Your partner can't count on your words. Are you one way in public, but you're different when you think no one's around, because we're functioning like an atheist and we forget about God's presence with us? Does your partner only know a fraction of who you are or a fraction of the truth? Until I did a disclosure, there was about 20% of my acting out and who I was and what I did that I kept close to my chest and swore I would never tell anyone. And it wasn't until my disclosure that I was fully known and that I brought everything into the light. There were no more fractions of truth. And finally, do you have levels of truth?